Hello everyone, welcome to Filmcopath. We hope all of you are doing well and keeping safe. The esteemed guest whom we have with us today is considered to be one of the pillars of the alternate aesthetics in Indian cinema. His debut feature film Ankur is a modern masterpiece which introduced Indian viewers to the side of cinema which they had seldom seen. The cinema rooted in real India with real people dealing with real circumstances. Many regard it to be the revival of the alternate cinema movement in India. He has made several award-winning documentaries and movies in his career spanning 5 decades now. He has been decorated with the Dada Saheb Phalke Award and has won the National Award 8 times. Today, we have with us Padma Bhusan, Mr. Shyam Benegal. Thank you, sir, for giving us this unique opportunity to interact with you.
Thank you.
I will straight away jump to the questions, sir. And my first question is from your movie Ankur. We have heard that the story or the script of Ankur was something you wanted to work on from your college days before we eventually turned it into your debut feature film years later. Why did this particular story inspire you so much?
When I was in college, I had seen a particular incident. There was a close to where we used to stay, a few kilometers away, was a piece of property, land, that belonged to a friend of mine. Now, we used to go there for our, on picnics and things like that at that time. And it was this young man who was also my friend, he got involved with the girl who used to work in the house, in their little farmhouse. And so that became the seed of the story. You see, so I had written a short story about it, which I intended to publish in my college magazine. Because I was the editor of my college magazine and I thought that it would probably be interesting to do it as a story. But later I decided that instead of doing it as a story, I should actually try and make a film of it. Because, I always had the ambition to be a filmmaker. And this seemed like a good enough subject to start with. Because somebody had told me, in fact, I think, I'm not quite sure, but I think probably it was Satyajit Ray himself, that he said, remember that your first film is a very important film for you. Because, you will be judged on the basis of that film for most part of your career. So it was important that your first film should be one that does matter a great deal to you. Because it will become the foundation of your own career. It's not always like that, mind you, because for a lot of people, they've made many films and then suddenly one day they make a film and then everybody recognizes that person as a great filmmaker on the basis of that particular film. Now, in my case, of course, I was very particular that the first film I should make, because it should be of a kind that would allow me to make a career out of being a filmmaker. It was important enough because I know that if that film had collapsed, for instance, had not done well, then my next opportunity, I wasn't quite sure when that was going to happen. And because in any case, I wasn't terribly young at that time. Because most people, when they make their first films, are in their early 20s. But I was hitting 30 at the time I made my first film. So it was something else. So I had to be very careful about what I was doing. And anyway, it took me some time, because I was working, and I didn't want to depend on a livelihood based on my being a filmmaker, professional filmmaker, who would earn entirely from making films. Because, I was in advertising and I was an advertising executive and also a copywriter. So when I was planning to make this film, this is what I was doing. and my career was going fairly well. So there didn't seem to me to be any reason, for me to jump ships, as it were, to take a leap into unknown territory by thinking that I would be a filmmaker by profession, apart from being a kind of avocation at that time. So anyway, but when I made the Ankur, I wasn't a filmmaker in that sense. I wasn't a professional filmmaker. I was a professional advertising man. I was making a livelihood by being in advertising. And but that gave me an opportunity, that I could have a career as a filmmaker. Because Ankur was very successful as a film. And because it was successful both in the marketplace as well as critically, and also was invited to several international film festivals, and all of that put together, I got an opportunity to make a second film on account of that,
Right.
which I made. And similarly, I got an opportunity to make a third film. So, that eventually led to my being a filmmaker by a professional filmmaker, in the sense that I didn't have to depend on having another job in order to make a living. But I could be a filmmaker both professionally and vocationally. So, but that took some time. It didn't happen overnight.
Right. Sir, we want to know about the casting of Ankur. Like, what led to the discovery of Shabana Azmi, who actually went on to become one of the most celebrated actors of India? And how did you find Anant Nag, who is perhaps maybe one of the most underrated actors in our country?
Well, he's not underrated in Kannada cinema. Kannada cinema is a huge star. But when I was making Ankur, there were several limitations. The most important limitation was the amount of money we had to make the film. And so obviously, I couldn't cast my net in the film industry, as it were. So my choice was limited to people who were new, who were not professionals in the film industry, because we couldn't afford them. Because Shabana was not necessarily my first choice, mind you, because I actually wanted to take Wahida to play that role. But she was already a big star at that time. So, and obviously she wasn't going to be interested in the first-time filmmakers' work, and that to an uncertain kind of work, because it wasn't part of the mainstream, and she was already a star, and it was too much of a chance for her to take, and so she wanted her career to function well. Now that's what it was. So, and I was then, when I was starting to cast, I was looking around for the kind of people I could put in my film, and so I relied on my friends and my colleagues, and particularly on a couple of people who were my good friends, who were doing a lot of theatre, amateur theatre, of course, but who were excellent directors, like Satyajit Ray, who was doing wonderful work in amateur theatre in Bombay at that time. And people like that, and they would say, well, have you looked at so-and-so? Because, I was looking at people who were acting in the theatre at that time and trying to make a livelihood there. So through Satyajit Ray, then I discovered that there were, in the amateur theatre areas, there was another person who could probably fit the role that I was, for which I wanted. And Satyajit Ray suggested a name of an actor to me. And that actor, he was a bit shy and awkward, and he wasn't sure that he'd make a grade. So as a kind of morals, to give him a bit of moral strength, he brought someone else with him. And that someone else was Anand. So, so I took him instead of the person who thought that he would get the part. But anyway, he was also a very good actor, but I won't name him, but he was also a very good actor. But Anand was right for the film. I hadn't thought of him, I hadn't seen him before. Once I'd done that, then of course somebody suggested that, maybe you should think of casting a girl who is doing a lot of acting and is wanting to be an actress, and she happens to be the daughter of a very famous poet. So that's how I asked Shabana, because she was Kathy's daughter, and then so Shabana, of course, came to see me. And the moment I saw her, I said that I found my Lakshmi, as it were. Because Lakshmi is the name of the actress in the story. The main lead woman. So I got my two actors. Once I got my two actors, everything else fell into place in no time at all. And then, of course, I went ahead and made the film. And we kept it within the budget that we had. And of course, it was shoestring and all that sort of thing. But then, you see, everybody was new. And most of us were totally untested when it came to the feature film, except my cameraman, who happened to be Govind Nehlani, But he had worked on features before, but nobody else had. But which was actually a bit of a help, because with him as a cameraman, it was one could in fact work out, so many things, the logistics of making a feature film, so many other things, and it also helped in structuring the film and breaking down the script into scenes and so on and so forth. So that was how we made the film. But after having made that film, which was a learning experience, it was a great learning experience for me, although I had made about 300 or 400 advertising films, but still making a feature, something that would hold your attention for 2.5 hours was something that I was doing for the first time. I had made documentaries and advertising films well before that. So making a film was not the big problem. No, making a feature film was the problem. And not only making a feature film, but a film that would hold people's attention and interest without having what at that time was considered elements of entertainment in the film. Because at that time you had a very strong kind of tradition of the Indian kind of commercial cinema, because you told a story, you had to have songs in it, you had to have some great lyric writer who would write those lyrics for you and things like that. And then, of course, a lot of stress was on dialogue writing and all of that sort of thing. And usually it was always the story that was very melodramatic and so on, see. Now, and one was going totally against all of those elements in my film. So once I made the film and it worked, then of course I got the confidence, and so did the person, the people who had backed me in making the first film. See, when they found that they had made a film that would work and that it would recover its cost, then I had no problem getting to make my second film, which was in fact much more challenging, because Nishant was a much more challenging film to make.
Yes.
Much more, it didn't have any element that one would consider would draw an audience automatically, But then I never looked back after Ankur, really, because, one after the other we had. And then, of course, when there were problems, we tried out so many things. Like my films were made, crowdfunded, for instance. Manthan was crowdfunded,
Yeah.
And then there were several other films after that that were, partially crowdfunded in any case. So, but then once you made a few films and people recognize you as a filmmaker, it isn't that difficult, you know.
We are so thankful to everyone that backed you at that time and gave you the references of these two actors, because that kind of brought such a difference in, the spectrum of Indian cinema in your hands, and all of this, it's kind of a team that which used to bring us this kind of cinema. And so there's very interesting ideas about this name Ankur. There are people who think that, that last shot, that protest which is kind of, emerging out of that last shot, that's the Ankur. There is this idea of this birth of, this alternate aesthetics I was talking about, that Ankur brought to the Indian cinema, the platform itself. And there is also this idea of it's a first film for you, for Shabana ji, for Anant Nag. So what exactly was this naming idea?
Well, see, that was a big problem at that time. What is the title going to be? And because it was the first film, I wanted the title to be one that would have a certain kind of freshness. It wouldn't be the kind of thing that you would hear normally, a title, And the stage part of it is that the title was given by Anand.
Oh.
He was the person.
Okay.
He said, why don't we think in terms of, the first sprout, of a plant, an Ankur. So, the seedling.
Yes.
So and he was the person who suggested that. There were, we had so many different titles. I used to ask my unit, whenever I was shooting, the normal tradition afterwards became that I would ask members of my unit that suggest a title for this film. And whichever title is accepted, that person would get 100 rupees in recognition of the fact that they had offered a good title for the film. So, I mean, it's just one of those things, But the fact was that most of the titles came on in that fashion.
Okay.
But I preferred to have a single word title.
Okay.
Because it was memorable, but I also wanted those titles to have a kind of meaning that would derive from the subject of the film itself. And therefore we had titles of that kind, one after the other, whether it was Nishant or Manthan, for instance, or Bhumika, Mandi, all of those films.
So there's a very interesting comment that I have read from one of your earlier interviews where you say political cinema will emerge when there is a need for it. I mean, from the surface itself, it makes so much sense, but we just wanted to talk to you about that. If you could elaborate what you are trying to suggest?
You see, when there is a need for something, then there will also be somebody who will be working on it. It's always there. It's always been like that. For instance, when a social system becomes exploitative beyond its acceptability, and it goes beyond its acceptability, there will be some kind of revolt against it, that sort of thing. So you have that happening in every art and everything in life. It happens. So it also happens in art. So whether there is a need or a demand for it, some which may not be articulated, but which can be recognized, particularly by a creative mind, And if it is recognized, then of course it will happen.
Right.
We have always been interested to know your casting choices between Shabana Azmi and Smita Patil. Like, they were both phenomenal actors who could perhaps do any role which were offered to them. So what was your thought process while casting them for one film and not the other, or different characters in the same film, as say in Mandi?
So when the censor saw the film, they said, "Oh my God, this is a film that is a call for a revolution." Because Mrs. Gandhi used to like watching films. She used to choose films to see. So I said, I would like her to see this film. See, Amrish, as you know, was a wonderful theatre actor.
Yeah.
But he was not a professional theatre actor. Don't look at actors as stars in that sense. I look at stars as actors.